As our panelists join us, I'm going to introduce Ritu Sharma, who is the moderator of this panel. Ritu is the Senior Gender Advisor to the International Youth Foundation and a Senior Visiting Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. In 1998, Ritu founded Women Thrive Worldwide, a nonprofit that puts the concerns of the poorest women and girls at the center of all U.S. assistance. Under 17 years of Ritu's leadership, Women Thrive successfully influenced numerous U.S. policies to benefit millions of women and girls worldwide. Ritu?
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. And I'm so delighted to see you here when we started in this movement. This is kind of like a little reunion up here. So I'm really deeply honored that I was asked to moderate this panel, especially because I've been one of your longest, probably most annoying agitators over the years. But I'm really happy to see this room so packed with new faces and young faces, so many new advocates and activists and technical experts coming up. We are finally really making progress in this gender space when we all don't know one another. That is a really, really good sign. So let me introduce our U.S. government panel for today. And we're going to get right into how this strategy, the adolescent girls strategy, among others in the U.S. government, is really going to be implemented in sort of T-7 months. First, we have Susan Markham, who is with the U.S. Agency for International Development. She's a senior coordinator for gender equality and women's empowerment. She has a policy all her own for gender equality and women's empowerment. That she is one of the leads in the agency for ensuring that gender and women's empowerment are two different things, but those are both integrated into everything that USAID does around the world. We have Carrie Hessler-Radelet, who is the 19th director of the Peace Corps, and she served in the Peace Corps in Western Samoa from 1981 to 83, so she's come a long way from Samoa, and we're delighted to have her leadership at Peace Corps. She's done some quite incredible things on gender at Peace Corps. Let Girls Learn is now one of the landmark initiatives, but Carrie also led an initiative to make sure that the health and safety of volunteers, particularly women volunteers, was front and center in the Peace Corps strategy. So thank you for that. Yay, all the Peace Corps volunteers and former RPCBs are really grateful for that. Nancy Lee is the Deputy CEO of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Thanks for being with us. MCC has had one of the oldest gender policies in the U.S. government, which they actually created in 2007 under the Bush administration. And they have just been a powerhouse on gender integration ever since then. Prior to joining the MCC, Dr. Lee was the general manager of the Multilateral Investment Fund at the Inter-American Development Bank. We have Ambassador Deborath Birx, the U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator and the Special Representative for Global Health Diplomacy. Also really delighted to have you here. Thrilled that the work that PEPFAR has been doing, not only on the DREAMS initiative, but from the very beginning of PEPFAR, has been one of the leading agencies in the U.S. government to consider gender, men's and women's gender roles, power dynamics, power relations in terms of how that plays out in HIV/AIDS transmission and treatment. And last but not least is Tina Chen. You have so many titles, Tina.
Yeah.
And any one of your jobs is like a huge undertaking. So she is assistant to the president. She's chief of staff to the First Lady and the executive director of the White House Council on Women and Girls. Tina has been hard at work on gender and women literally since day one. First day in the White House on this issue. What are we going to do for women and girls, not just in our own country, but around the world, and has not let up ever since. And yesterday's event, for all of you that were able to be there, I think was a tribute and a testimony to everyone's leadership, but in particular the White House leadership on this issue, which has never been anything close to what it has been. Yeah. So, thank you. So, starting with you, Tina, as you look out across now this, we have essentially a whole field of strategies. We've got the USAID strategy, we've got the youth policy, we've got adolescent girls strategy, we've got the president's strategy on violence against women, we've got the national action plan. So we've got, I don't know if we can generate any more policies, maybe. But as you look at this time you have remaining, and probably the next president will be someone who supports this issue, will continue.
Official function, right?
Right. We're crossing our fingers. We're all going to work together to see that happen. But thinking through all of these things taken together, it has been such a sea change across the U.S. government. What are you thinking about these next 7 months? I know you're probably planning a really long vacation. What are you thinking about what you would like to make sure happens from across the U.S. government to give this a great liftoff?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ritu. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you. I sat through the prior panel. Thank you for all of civil society's work, because as was said, the work that we have been able to achieve as represented in the most recently adolescent girl strategy, but all of the strategies and everything we talked about yesterday really came about quite strongly on a partnership. It's not government alone, and it's not private sector alone. It's got to be civil society and NGOs, academics, and young people themselves, who I see here today too, speaking out and contributing. And I think part of the success that we have had has been it's something that the president understands intrinsically, coming from his own background as a community organizer, and he starts at the top. And that is the tone that he's set for us, on all the work that we do, but this emphasis on women and girls is something that he set from the top, from the very beginning. It's no accident, as we always talk about Lilly Ledbetter being the first bill, but that's no accident. It was a choice by him and an emphasis he wanted to place that has carried through the entire 7.5 years. And you saw it yesterday in how he talks about this issue and how firmly he believes in it. And to Turner's point in the last panel about how do you deal with it in an environment, and how do you go to the next issue, that was the theory behind the case of the Council of Women and Girls. And there's some in this room probably who remember that some folks weren't too happy with us when we decided to create a Council of Women and Girls and not a Women's Policy Office in the White House. But the idea was to make sure that this was not just one set of people's responsibility within the government, and that you could just look to the Office of Women's Policy to say that's their job. It was, as the president said very clearly in March of '09 when he created it, it was the responsibility of every part of the government, and therefore, whether we're negotiating trade policy, whether we're negotiating Paris and environmental policy, whether we're going to APEC and G20 and G8, where at every single one of those, for about the last 6 years, the president has put women's political and economic empowerment on the center of the leaders' table, not a side event, but the center of the leaders' table conversation. It's embedding these issues deeply in everything that we do, and we will continue to do that. So, quick answer on in the next 7 months. We are all thinking about, and certainly those of us in the White House are thinking a lot about how we use this remaining time to embed the work we're doing as deeply into the agencies. It's not a secret. It's sort of a secret, but it's not a secret that we're trying to embed this as deeply inside each agency, involving career staff in what we do, making sure there's multi-year funding for the Let Girls Learn Fund or for USAID's programming or the Challenge Fund or what's going on with PEPFAR. We launch into multi-year strategies and we start multi-year. It helps when they're fully funded already, and that's why the private sector commitments that we've been getting, and we will continue to get more, are so critically important, because it's a little hard to say we're going to stop doing something that's already funded. So we are doing that, and also a lot of yesterday was to lift these issues up, show the broad range of support and effect they have, the benefits that they provide, and really make that clear, across the board. But then I will say that the challenge, this is my final thing, there's only so much we can do here. And there's only so much that those of us up here can do, as much as we've been doing the last 7.5 years. We are now at the point where power is shifting back to the people. That's the way our democracy works. And right now we're in the moment where you all in this room hold a lot more power than we do. on making sure this stuff continues. And that would be my challenge back to everybody here.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I'm going to take that to mean not just go vote, which we all should, but that also that we all have a role to play in every piece of what we're doing in our work to make sure that we integrate this.
And raise it in the election season. Don't just wait for the
Absolutely.
new administration to come in, which I heard talked about, but raise it right now when the moment is when people are looking to get your support.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take that to the debate with Donald Trump. So, Susan, talk about where your thoughts are in terms of embedding this in USAID. And I should preface that by saying that it would almost be like putting a little bit of whipped cream and a cherry on top for embedding in USAID, because you've done such a huge job in transforming that agency and how it looks at, thinks about, and does gender. But specifically on the adolescent girls strategy, what do you hope to do on that in the next few months?
Thank you so much for that. Do I need a microphone? Well, first of all, I should say that, you know, I've only been in this job 2 years, although they're dog years. They're still just 2 years. And, you know, there are so many USAID colleagues that are here that have been in the agency much longer than me. And I think one of the powers of the gender equality and women's empowerment policy is the fact that we've created such a strong gender architecture around USAID. And so I have so many gender champs and partners and deputies and folks across the agency in DC and in the missions who are helping implement that policy. So what we're trying to do with the adolescent girl strategy is we like it because it focuses on a specific, very important part of development. And if we can focus efforts and be more intentional around the issues around adolescent girls, we think it will help almost every other part of the agency. We can prevent some of the maternal and child health. We can prevent some other health issues if we focus on adolescent girls and the specific issues that they deal with to prevent other issues that we have. We are also looking that within adolescent girls, there are different age groups, and the interventions that we have for girls who are 10 to 13 are very different than ones we might have for 14 to 18. So thinking about some of those issues. As you know, we just finished an assessment of not only the GBV and the National Action Plan, but also our internal gender policy. So we are hoping to take some of the lessons learned from the implementation of those and really learn from them as we implement the adolescent girl strategy. We're going to take a multi-sectoral approach, as we have with the gender policy, working on training. I can't remember who asked that question, but we often now don't need to make the why case, it's the how. So we do a combination of online and in-person trainings, not just talking at people, but working through issues. And when they say, what does adolescent girls have to do with me? I work in infrastructure. We talk about bathrooms, and we talk about roads and bridges, and how different people literally use those infrastructure projects differently. So we're gonna do the training. We're gonna continue to create toolkits, which everyone can find on our website, but are really focused at USAID staff, so it's specific to the sector. So whether it's economic growth or education or energy issues, we can talk about gender and specifically issues around adolescent girls for that. We're also working on our indicators, both how we measure the money that's spent as well as the beneficiaries of our program, to not only disaggregate the data by sex, but also by age band. So we can be much more intentional, and staff around the world can be thinking about how the programs that we implement can be done differently depending on the age and sex of the beneficiary.
Thank you. That is tremendous, and particularly the data piece, because as we all know, when we're trying to figure out what is the status of women and girls, we've been in this data void for too many years, and now the data is coming online from USAID, and I think what we're finding in the community is we don't have the resources to mine and analyze that rich data that we're getting. So we need to figure out how to do that. Maybe it's lots of postgraduate students that just need to dive in and look at all this information that we've got. But it is really a treasure trove. And
I can say, I think a strong partnership that we are creating also with governments around the world. So in conjunction with the SDGs, that it's not just USAID and US government programs, but every government is seeking to collect this data in order to partner with us and have a further sustainability of our programs.
Great. Great. Ambassador Birx, thinking about PEPFAR, one of the things that happens with PEPFAR, because you are so successful in getting your money from Congress, is that...
The White House. The president.
And the president, that's very helpful. But is that many, many, many things have found their way into PEPFAR, including a lot of gender strategies, a lot of women's empowerment programming, and now a lot of adolescent girls programming. And talk about how that fits into the core work of PEPFAR, including the DREAMS project, but beyond that, and how you see that moving forward in terms of getting knitted together with everything that PEPFAR does.
Well, I think PEPFAR has tried from the beginning to learn and build on everything and identify the gaps through the data, and not perceptions, but actually using the data. And that, I love the comment about unlearning, because we had a lot of perceptions of what has created gaps, but when you look at the data, then you really see where the gaps are and how they're being created. So I think as programs got implemented, remember PEPFAR grew out of a PMTCT program. So it was through implementing that PMTCT program,
that is
prevention of mother-to-child transmission. So they realized we had healthy babies and dead moms. So we prevented the baby from getting infected, but the mother then went on to die. And we knew the data from USAID that if your mother is dead, you don't thrive. So PEPFAR really grew out of that very clear indicator that we were failing. And so PEPFAR said, let's see what a mom needs to thrive. And that was treatment, or that was access to prevention, that was gender-based violence. And then Secretary Clinton launched the Violence Against Children survey, and then we saw what was just said in the college campuses. 1 in 5 girls' lifespan at college, 4 years, 1 in 5 chance of being raped. If you're born in Africa, you have a 30% chance that your first sex is forced or raped. So now we start seeing these coalitions of what data do we have in the United States that can help us, and what data can we bring to PEPFAR. So we are constantly mining domestic insights to take them globally, and taking global insights and bringing them back domestically. What puts young men of color at risk for HIV in South LA, and what does in KZN, South Africa. And so I think we have added, yes, we've added maternal and child health programming to PEPFAR because we look at the whole child, we look at the whole mother. And I think the biggest really huge launch, which President Obama's very clever. So remember, our targets go into another administration. That's one way to ensure that the next administration stays focused on this issue. So when he announced the targets, he committed whoever is the next president for that whole next year to achieve that success. So that's why the DREAMS target, the key 40% decline in HIV infections is 2017. So that commits the team, that commits the program, that commits the in-country work to stay focused through a transition. Because that's in the end what you want. You want people focused on implementing the program, implementing this strategy now. And DREAMS has taken this strategy, because we had a little look ahead, and we're trying to make sure that that's being implemented in exactly this way. But DREAMS will be the first total integrated program, putting the adolescent at the center and saying, what do you need from the community? What do you need from the family? What do you need for yourself? And what do we need together to have an educated, thriving young woman? We've done it for babies, we've done it for mothers, and I think now we're really putting the adolescent at the center and translating words into action, which I think that's what we're really excited about. And that's what we're so excited that President Obama took this huge risk. Because everybody came back from OMB and said, what data do you have that you can decrease incidence of new HIV by 40%? I said, I don't have any data, but that's the minimum to keep the incidence of HIV from rising staggeringly, because we have 40% more young women today in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's the minimum just to keep HIV constant at 2 million new infections. So that seemed to compel, and
Whatever works
the
for
president
OMB.
took that bold announcement to really support this really visionary program that I think will really bring education, bringing gender-based violence, bringing a new outcome for young and adolescent girls to the future.
Great. Very, very exciting, and I like that, tying the hands of the next girl who's coming in. So, Carrie, talk about how the Peace Corps grassroots approach. I mean, you work at the most grassroots level possible. How are volunteers getting mobilized and engaging adolescent girls and actually adolescent boys too? Because we don't want to create this environment. I have 2 boys. One of them's an adolescent. He has needs. He does.
He does.
So,
they all do.
yes. So, yeah.
Excellent question.
Explore that.
First of all, I want to start by asking all of you who served as Peace Corps volunteers to raise your hand, or staff. There, look at that. That's one of the most important things we do. We are the farm team.
Yes.
We are the farm team. The other thing I just want to say about this administration, more than any other administration, I think, ever in history, President Obama and his team of amazing leaders has brought the U.S. government together in a coherent way. The whole of government has been implemented at every front. And Peace Corps, because we're multi-sectoral, we are in whole of government initiatives in every major sector, and it's so exciting, and we are learning from each other. So I just want to say that. The other thing that's very exciting for me personally is that for the first time really ever, Peace Corps is at the table, and it's recognized that we are part of the Foreign Assistance Toolbox. Historically, we have worked very independently, completely unaligned with our other partners. But we play such an important role at the grassroots level to make sure that the development investments of others, all of these folks, and the development investments are substantial. I mean, millions of dollars. But we all know where they take hold at the ground level is what either creates success or makes it an abject failure. And so our volunteers who are at the ground can make sure that evidence-based interventions are really owned by the community, are implemented properly at the community level, that they are monitored and evaluated and sustained over time. So you all know that our volunteers are integrated into the community. That is key to their success. They speak the language, they understand the culture, they develop deep, deep relationships of trust with their community. They go to do a particular job. They are teachers, they are health workers, they are youth entrepreneurship coaches. So that's their job. They're there at the request of their community and their government. But they do so much more. They have tea with the village elder. They play soccer with the primary school kids, and they hang out with the adolescent boys and girls. And it's in these in-between times that the deep, deep relationships of trust, relationships that give our volunteers insight into the barriers to girls' education and empowerment, and the opportunities, the solutions that they have in mind. That's where they get that insight. It gives them the credibility to be able to suggest new alternatives, to introduce evidence-based interventions. And so the key, the absolute key to our success is the relationship of trust, and it is our unique niche. Let Girls Learn has enabled our volunteers, our staff, and our counterparts to really tap into the deep expertise that exists right here, both in terms of USG partners, but also civil society, to be able to make sure that our interventions that our volunteers are working on with their community are based in evidence and have proven through evidence to be effective at achieving, results that we want. Can I just take 1 minute to tell a story, because it is the most powerful way to...
Yeah, we're only going to remember stories anyway,
I know.
So go ahead.
So I want to, because it's really the only way to communicate the Peace Corps experience. And this story happened just 2 weeks ago, and I have literally thousands of stories, but this is a new story 2 weeks ago. So Emmeline is 17. She is a girl from a small village in Benin, and 2 weeks ago she attended a GLOW camp, Girls Leading Our World. This is the kind of camp that Peace Corps volunteers do in more than 50 countries, actually almost 60 countries around the world. We've been doing camps for 20 years. Thanks to our partnership through Let Girls Learn, we now have even more evidence-based tools to make our camps even more effective. But they're basically girls' leadership camps. And Emmeline was a really active member. She was a model participant, very actively engaged. She attended all the sessions. She learned about sexual and reproductive health and girls' and women's rights, and she developed some skills in public speaking, and she learned about leadership. She identified a few role models within her own country that she wanted to model her life on. And she came to our Peace Corps volunteer sort of leadership group that was managing this camp on the very last day, just like hours before she was supposed to leave, get on the bus and go back to her community. And she said, I really took to heart that what I learned about girls' and women's rights And she said, I really think that my own life situation is, I'm living in violation of my rights. She said, my day begins at 4:30 or 5 in the morning when I have to get up early, I have to clean the house, I have to wash the clothes by hand, I have to cook breakfast, I have to iron my siblings' uniforms, I have to go fetch water and firewood. I barely have enough time to get to school, and sometimes I don't, frequently I don't. I have a headache pretty much all the time from exhaustion. I don't eat very much because I'm always the last one to eat because I'm the one who's cooking the food, and by the time I get to the table, there's nothing left. And she says, she told our volunteer, she said, I'm just not able to thrive. You talk about girls thriving. I am so not thriving. And she said, I thought that's the way it was, the way it had to be for girls. I know so many other girls who have the same life story as I do, and I thought that was the way it had to be. But what I learned this week is that it does not have to be that way, and I want to change my life. I want to address the barriers, and we need to start with my family. Mm-hmm. So all Glow Camp participants are there with a volunteer from their community. So there's like a group of maybe, 10 volunteers from a particular community with a volunteer. So the Peace Corps volunteer went back to her community. Now, mind you, she had already the volunteer herself had already well integrated into the community. So she knew the local leaders, she knew the parents, and she knew the teachers. She identified a teacher that was really a great leader in the community, and together they approached her family and talked to them about the importance of investing in Emmeline's education as a way to bring future income to the family, but also helping their community. Talked about this, they worked together to strategize solutions to meet the needs, the domestic chore needs, but in a way that will allow Emmeline to have a little time to study and perhaps a little more sleep, and to guarantee that she had some food. So some very concrete strategies about how to structure their domestic chores so she could be more successful with her job. And what we hear is that, already she's back and happy at school, but feeling so much more confident about her future. And apparently she's talking about being a doctor. So anyway, that's just a small example. But that kind of work would not happen if volunteers didn't live at the community level, have the deep relationships of trust, have access to evidence-based interventions, and then be able to work with communities to scale it up. Emmeline is becoming a champion within her own community. And that's the kind of person we want to be empowering. Through
Thank you for that. We just need to do that 1 billion more times.
I know.
Then we're going to be there. Nancy, MCC plays a really interesting role in that you have funded education in a variety of countries, particularly where there's been a gender gap. And one of the things we also know is that we have to invest in economic growth, because I know when I travel now and I talk to families about education, if a girl gets an education but can't find a job, there's no economic return to her family, there's no incentive to send the other girls to school. And we're getting a little bit of this negative feedback loop on girls' education. Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned, what MCC has learned about girls' education and where you're headed in the future?
Thanks so much. It is, as always, an honor and a pleasure to be with this group of women leaders. And it's always hard. It's hard to follow Carrie because I don't have a story of an individual, but maybe actually it works fairly well because maybe I can take the conversation to the other extreme, which is to put this in the broadest possible context, which is the global economy. And in particular, what's been happening to global growth. If you've been following the financial newspapers, there's lots of concerns about global growth. It's slow. The World Bank just reduced the estimate for 2016 to 2.4%, very low. And there are a lot of economists who are saying this is not just a cyclical issue. This is a long-term issue. A lot of the drivers of growth that we've seen in recent years, the growth of China, productivity growth, capital investment, the commodity boom, all of those are subsiding. So if you're a leader of a government and you're looking around for some credible routes to sustained and significant increases in your growth paths, the picture doesn't look real good at the moment. Although some governments are now looking at the participation of women in the labor force, and they see that it's low. And one of the more reliable ways that you can promote growth in an economy is to increase the labor force. So we see a number of countries that have put women squarely in the middle of their growth strategies. Countries from Japan, South Korea on the rich end, to Benin, Liberia, Morocco, India, Indonesia, Bangladesh. Lots of countries are now seeing women as a macroeconomic issue, a growth issue. And that changes the headlines, just to pick up on Kathy's theme from before. That makes investing in adolescent girls a macroeconomic investment and a growth investment as well as a social investment. So I think all of us collectively have to keep that in the conversation, on people's radar screens, because there's a remarkable number of countries that don't include women at all in their growth strategy. So that's the potential. At the same time, if you actually look at women's participation in the labor market over the last 25 years, you see almost no progress. The share of women participating in the labor market, I'm talking about in paid jobs outside the home, it's not that women don't work, is stuck at roughly 50% globally, with male participation at 75% or higher. So we got a 25 percentage point gap. And it hasn't moved in a long time. So there was a question earlier, what do we know that we don't know? Well, I don't think we fully understand why there's been no progress. We should have seen an uptick in labor force participation as we saw this improvement in skills for women and girls, at least at the primary school level. We didn't see that. So what that means is there's a big risk that we're not seeing this positive feedback loop between rising skills and therefore rising access to jobs and therefore more demand for skills. So that's the second point I wanted to make, which is the demand side of education. We're all very focused on the supply side. MCC is heavily invested in infrastructure, both to get girls to school, but also school infrastructure, girl-friendly school infrastructure, invested in more skilled teachers, school administrators, better curricula. But we need to think about the demand side as well. Supply doesn't necessarily create its own demand here. Not every girl is as strong as Sarah and will literally stand outside of school and listen, and even if she's not let in the school. So we need to think about how to address issues like the fact that women are shut out in a number of societies of jobs which represent the areas of greatest job growth, the fact that the prevailing view is jobs are scarce, and if there are any jobs available, men should have them, the fact that households, parents view girls occupying themselves with household chores as a better use of their time than going to school, the physical insecurity for girls as they go to and from schools, even when they get to schools, and certainly when they go to and from work. All of those things have to be part of our design of projects. This is what we've learned over time. We have to think about the supply side and the demand side, and we have to design interventions that collectively work together. Which brings me to the last point, which is, if that's the way you think about the problem, you have to engage way outside governments. Certainly with governments, but also with civil society, with communities, and particularly the business sector, who are potential employers. You have to create these partnerships within agencies, but you also have to design the projects, bringing a lot of other actors in at the same time. Makes life more complicated. There are a lot of moving parts that have to come together to make the project work. But for a large-scale grant provider like MCC, it's incumbent upon us to do that, as we have evidence that working alone on supply is not going to create the returns on our investment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. That's, I think, really important to talk about this role of employers. I've been lucky to transition to the International Youth Foundation and to be able to begin working with employers on bringing young women into traditional occupations as well as non-traditional occupations. And I think one of the big issues that we run into are two words: maternity leave. Huge disincentive for employers, and no laws like we have here providing protection for pregnant mothers. That it's a huge barrier that we need to address from a financial, cultural, a social norm point of view. But I think that's part of what's behind that stickiness with not seeing those numbers go up. So, Kathy, I'm going to start the questions with you. So we've been collecting cards from the audience that you were writing over lunch, and we've scanned a number of these, and I'm going to combine some of the questions that are somewhat similar, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. One question that often comes up, and you're going to say, oh, here we go again, but it's an important one, which is that with all the funding that we put in and that we invest, how can we get more funding to locally based organizations that are working at the grassroots with young women and with young men? So if you want to take a shot at that, Kathy, that would be great.
I'm happy to take a shot at that. I also, if I can take a moment, can I just?
Yes,
okay.
please do.
I have two quick things I want to mention. One is that, and this is a little bit in response to Lyric, and she's going to dread me because every time I see her in one of these events, I give her another job to do. But I do have one here, which is, I think, as I was thinking about as you were talking, I think what we need to do is, if you can help organize this with the group, we need like regular missives from you, okay, about what's working, what's not working. It was tremendously helpful, not just to have it, but to have it in writing and to have it organized so that we weren't getting like 50 different things from 50 people. But I think if we can start that process now, and we should talk about how maybe quarterly, whatever, things that you see that are helpful, not helpful, that would be really useful to us, and I think it would set a good precedent going forward. Second, and I mentioned this briefly, but we're doing this work in two focus countries. We've started in Malawi and Tanzania. I really can't overstate how important this is to us, to me personally, to the work that we're doing here, because we're trying to do exactly what all these people have been talking about, which is everyone here is tremendously talented. They have great expertise. We are trying to bring to bear all of that in a place with respect to women and girls, and see if by doing that, bringing all of you who have some interest in it, bring our bilateral partners, our multilateral partners together, if we can try to move the needle in a way that we have not been able to do as we would like to in individual places. And it's because that's just not the way the US government typically works. We are trying to bend that process a little bit and really focus in a couple of places and see if we do it in a really comprehensive way, if we can have an impact. And so this is an ask to all of you. Many of you are already engaged in this process. If you're not, I'd like you to think about how you could do it. If your organizations are doing work that is relevant, Susan is running a great process, on USAID process, to try to bring together the best thinking about this. But I'd like all of you, if you're doing work, if you have some ideas, please let us know what they are, because it would be tremendously helpful to us. And I would also just mention that, I feel like I'm going to be tagged as the queen of strategies, but we are doing an economic empowerment strategy. It's done, actually, and we'll put that out too for women to see. That's for all of you to see. It's about women, and it sort of goes to this point that you all are talking about, that is, this is a continuum, right? We are trying to get girls from the moment they're born until the moment they die as women, and think about what the challenges are and how we can address them comprehensively. And this is another piece. I totally take the point, I'm sorry, maybe Nancy, you said it, but about we have to be thinking about, we can get them educated, but then we need to move them into jobs. How are we going to do that, right? Well, we need to think about the economic empowerment implications of what we're doing and try to think about how to expand that. So, okay, so I'm sorry. I was just building up. I had to get all that stuff out.
Very helpful.
So wait, tell me your
question.
So the question. This is a question for Susan. I think this is a good question. Okay.
Getting the funding to local organizations.
Look, this is a constant struggle.
Yes.
I mean, I know you say, but it is, and Susan's better, in my office, we do small grants, and so we have the ability to get things at a more local level. you know, when you're looking at it's a big government, right? When we do big things, Susan in particular, Deb too, you know, these are big grants and big funding mechanisms, and the idea is to partner with locals, but I mean, Susan is better to address that. I think we understand the importance of that, and we're very mindful of making sure that the people who are being impacted in this are included in the discussions and included in the design. That's what we were working on in Tanzania. We're trying to do that, but I also think everyone needs to think just a little bit about the scale of what we're trying to do and understand that as much as we want to do that, it is not an easy thing to do. But Susan is a better person to give the broader. Sorry.
Go, Susan.
Sorry, Susan. We testified together this morning, and every time we got a tough question, I'm like, Susan is the right person to answer that question.
I'm like the funny sidekick. So, I mean, as Ambassador Russell referenced, at USAID, we continue to work on this issue, and as you might have heard me say before, our challenge is both reaching out and empowering more local organizations, which are often women-led. It's kind of a place that women have the freedom to be leaders. And we love these organizations because of the work they do on the ground, but we don't want to fundamentally change who they are when they become a U.S. government-funded organization. It changes how other parts of their community and how their government looks at them, and also the tremendous amount of paperwork that comes along with being a U.S. government-funded organization can change the work you're doing with grassroots to filling out papers. And so we are looking at new mechanisms, certainly the broad agency announcement, where we are trying to co-create programs and bring in a variety of voices. We're doing more and more of this sort of co-creation or challenges or prizes where we're trying to collect these ideas, because I think we know and we understand that we do not have all the answers in the world. And then the more we talk to people who live this every day, our programs are both better, more effective, and more sustainable.
But I think you have to create space. And so with that Dreams Innovation Challenge, we specifically created space for groups who wanted $50,000 versus $100,000 versus $250,000. But that means that you're granting 100 to 150 grants, which we're committed to do. But when you start doing this, when you look at CDC, which is now 65% into indigenous organizations within PEPFAR, they went from 80 to 600. And, you know, CDC's like, we can't handle anymore. But, I mean, that's what it really takes for us to figure that out. And I think as a U.S. government, we have to figure that out and be very intentional about that kind of investment, kind of like the Small Business Association, but for the on-the-ground community.
I think it can be done. Absolutely.
One other thing, and that is that Peace Corps, through the Let Girls Learn Fund, has micro loans. So, not loans, grants, for community organizations, for community-led initiatives. They don't even actually require an organization. I mean, they're as tiny as maybe $250 for a specific activity or intervention that addresses a specific barrier right there in their community, implemented by that group of people, by the girls and their families. And that's what it's designed to do. And we've already implemented more than 200 just in the last year of these smaller grants, less than $5,000. And we are excited because we're going to be doing thousands more this coming year. So you have, you know, the large grants here, and then the micro grants that are run through our Let Girls Learn Fund. And the exciting thing is we have actually, thanks to our private sector partners, we've raised more than $2 million for the Let Girls Learn Fund. So that is being channeled through more than 3,000 Peace Corps volunteers around the world. And very shortly, within the next year or so, every single volunteer in every single Peace Corps country is going to have access to those funds so that they can do these community-led activities to address the specific barriers that community faces.
Great. I mean, I think there are definitely mechanisms to do this. We have the whole African Development Fund, the Inter-American Development Fund, the Asia Foundation. I mean, there are many, many mechanisms to do it, and I think it's been very exciting to see the whole U.S. government kind of moving in that direction. So this question is about adolescent girls and boys and about the backlash that can happen when we have this big party for adolescent girls. Where's the party for adolescent boys? And how do we maneuver the implementation of this to not create that backlash from fathers or from boys or from others who, you know, equally care about sons? How do you think that is going to happen in your rollout?
Well, I'm smiling in part because I've kind of lived through for the last 2 years the question of in reaction to my brother's keeper, where's my sister's keeper?
Right.
I mean, with every,
Right.
and some of what you have to understand, there are a lot of we're a very diverse world and country, and there are very specific needs in different specific communities that require, some specific interventions, and taking a moment to focus on those is not to the exclusion of others. And there are also strategies like a lot of what we've done around education, a lot of what we've done. We talked a lot, the suspensions yesterday was raised, and how girls are, suspended, at a much higher rate. Well, so are African-American boys, and that's an MBK strategy. So one of the strategies that we've implemented under the moniker of My Brother's Keeper, but it really affects girls as well as boys, has been, a pretty great turnaround, and I'm forgetting the number of school jurisdictions that have actually changed their suspension policies as a result of the work that we've been doing. So, I'm a really strong proponent of women and girls. It's been my thing, but I think it's very important because, as we know, one of the things we've talked a lot about is what we want to do in Let Girls Learn is make sure that we are addressing the very particular barriers that adolescent girls face, because we know they face greater cultural barriers, they face greater barriers around violence, and others that keep them from getting to schools. But that doesn't mean that in another part of the work that we are doing as a federal government, we're not also dealing with, the issues that confront boys. And then finally, I will say one of the things that the president said yesterday too is that we have to get past the gender-based norms that are entrapping both men and women in our societies as a whole. And one of the things overall we have to do is collectively as men and women, get past those, because they are confining men as equally as they are confining women and girls and what we can do.
That is an excellent, excellent place to stop. And please join me in thanking this incredible group of women for today, but also for the last 8 years. Thank you.
All these people here from yesterday. I never got that.
Because I'm a girl, I love braiding my sister's hair, dancing and playing with my friends, drawing diagrams and solving equations. Because I'm a girl, I have dreams. When I grow up, I want to be a doctor, a judge, or maybe a scientist. And I dream of having a family with my true love. But I know that none of these dreams will come true. Because I'm a girl, I'll be forced to drop out of school like so many other girls my age. Because I'm a girl, boys bully me. Men desire me. School is no longer a safe place for me to be. Because I'm a girl, I get up first and cook and clean. I come last in my family. Because I'm a girl, I have to get married at 13. Have babies before my body is ready. And have more children than I can keep healthy. Girls like me, without an education, are the poorest on the planet. We have no control over our lives and no way out of poverty. I know that staying in school would mean a better life than my mother. Then I could lead the way for my sisters and friends. We could decide our future, when to marry and which job. And together we could show everybody how girls make the community stronger and richer. The people at Plan see the potential in girls like me. They'll help me stay in a good, safe school, find new and better ways for my family to earn money, and give me skills for life so that I stay healthy and be all I can be. Give me a chance and I'll take it from here, because I am a girl.
Yay!
we've had a really amazing early afternoon with some really engaging conversations from our civil society representatives and our U.S. government representatives. We hope that you will now join us for our concurrent panels. We have 4 panels that will happen at the same time, so let me give you a little bit of information. Before I do, though, I've been asked by our U.S. government representatives to, if you have questions still that you wrote out on the cards, if you could put them back in the baskets, because these questions are very important to them. They really would like to see your comments and your questions. So if you have any additional questions, they know they couldn't get to all of you, but they're interested in hearing from you. Okay, so now we are going to ask you, you can take a break. We'll have a little bit of a transition time, but we're going to have snacks and coffee at the outside of each of the rooms where the concurrent sessions are. So unless you're staying in this room for the panel 3, please go directly to your rooms and you will find snacks and coffee there. For this room, there are snacks and coffee outside. Panel 1, Gender Equality in Education, that's on meeting level 1, so you have to go up 3 escalators to meeting level 1, and there will be a sign for you. Panel 2, Gender and Economic Empowerment, just 1 level up, meeting level 3, Union Station Room. The 3rd panel, Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, stays here. And the 4th is on adolescent LGBTQIA rights. That's meeting level 3, just 1 level up by the escalator. Enjoy your panels. Please join us back here after your panels for Dr. Sen Martin, and then we will have closing remarks.